Good afternoon. Welcome to Wednesday Wisdom with Dustin, Gard, Weiss. We will begin today's program with a video from our sponsor.
Where is possible? Past the edge of convention, beyond the boundaries of tomorrow, where no idea is too bold and no challenge too great. It's here where we break free from what is to what could be. Because defining the future is impossible until it's not.
Please welcome INSA President Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's Wednesday Wisdom. We're thrilled to have Dustin, Gard, Weiss with us today. Please take note of the box on the right-hand corner of your screen where you can ask questions. We have close to 500 attendees tuned in today, so please know we'll do our very best to get to them. I also wanted to mention that we are opening this event to the press, and so please remember that this is on the record, and a recording of today's discussion will be available on our website by the end of the week. And I also wanted to thank our sponsor, Northrop Grumman. As so many of you all know, the programming that we are able to deliver virtually would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Along that vein, I am pleased to welcome Andy Holtzel, Director of Cyber Intelligence Mission Solutions Division at Northrop Grumman, who will introduce our guest speaker today. Andy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank INSA for hosting this program and for continuing to deliver vital thought leadership during these challenging times. Northrop Grumman is a proud and longtime supporter of INSA. We appreciate the open dialogue with INSA members through events like today's, which really help serve to strengthen the partnership between government and industry in support of the intelligence community. Now it's my privilege to introduce today's speaker. As Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Policy and Capabilities, Dustin Gard Weiss works to ensure that the intelligence community is positioned to anticipate and respond to future mission requirements. Previously, he served as AD&I for enterprise capacity. And before joining ODNI, Mr. Gard Weiss was NGA's first Associate Director for Enterprise, responsible for leading and managing U.S. and international GEOINT community partnerships, executing the GEOINT functional manager authorities, and chairing the U.S. GEOINT Committee of Record. He's also held leadership positions with the Office of Naval Intelligence and with DIA. So welcome, Dustin, and over to you, Suzanne.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks again to Northrop Grumman. I wanted to mention, Dustin, before we get started, today we have live captioning available. If anyone is interested in that, you can go into the chat and click on a link to get to the live captioning. But on to our conversation. I have at least 24 questions that were sent to us before the event, and I see some rolling in right now. So I have a few of my own, and then I will get to our audience questions. But Dustin, you're 3 months in to this new role with a new organization. Can you talk a little bit about the catalyst behind the formation of the organization and how the past 3 months have been going?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks, Andy, for the introduction. By the way, just as a side note, it took INSA to bring us back together. I worked with Andy probably 20 years ago on the Navy staff, so it was great to see him again. So back to the question. So the logic behind the realigned ODNI is several. First, the Director of National Intelligence, Ratcliffe, when he came in, he wanted to ensure that the organization was best set up for the future and best able to deliver against the threats that we're confronting. And we realized that there were some opportunities to evolve from the previous organizational structure, and which resulted in establishing two directorates. One, the Directorate for Mission Integration, headed by Beth Sanner, the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for that, is largely focused on ensuring that the intelligence community is meeting the needs of today, whether it be collection, analysis, and the full range of missions. My directorate, Policy and Capabilities, is really responsible for ensuring that the intelligence community is best postured for the future. And this is really an evolution, as I said, from previous organizational instantiations. And most recently, the previous structure and the leadership of Kevin Miners, Cornerstone, General Karen Gibson, Kelly Gaffney, and others, that really enabled us to continue that evolution and to create this organization. As the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Policy and Capabilities, I think, I see myself as being responsible for advancing the IC's integration of mission priorities and requirements to develop and implement strategy, policies, and capabilities to meet future national security challenges and opportunities. I mean, the scope of the portfolio and the range of issues has really given me the privilege of working with intelligence professionals from across the ODNI and the IC that has really affirmed for me that we have an amazing team. And I think we'll talk a little bit about, I want to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. And then substantively, just really quickly, I think this also reflects the stark reality of the threats we face, right? The changes in the domestic and global environment that have resulted in sort of this increasingly complex and uncertain world, the threats that challenge every aspect of our nation's security domestically and internationally, the speed and adaptation of new technology that drives ways that we operate and drives threats in some unbelievable ways. By the way, unbelievable, challenging, and amazing opportunities. And then we also look at artificial intelligence, communication technology, biotech, material sciences, areas that we're advancing and changing the way that we live. I mean, our day-to-day lives, let alone how we work, and recognizing that adversaries are investing in and doing the same. So there's a range of threats, range of challenges, but I'm really excited to be in this role and humbled to be given this opportunity.
Well, we're glad you're there. You mentioned a little bit about challenges. So hoping you can kind of outline some of the challenges that you have in your new role and as an organization, and how to mitigate those in the future.
So if it's okay, can I start with sort of some initial sense of sort of strategic priorities and then maybe weave in challenges through that?
That'd be great.
Just to help provide some context for how I'm thinking about this role, recognizing 3 months in, so still gelling. But so 4 primary strategic priorities. First, the first charge from the DNI was to ensure that we're better postured for the future than we are today. If we're going to do that, we need to have a better understanding of where we are today, and to constantly sort of assess the IC's posture relative to that future, sort of challenge opportunity I mentioned, the future landscape, the future threat environment, that sort of the technological possibilities. We've got to ensure that our IC capabilities and investments deliberately address those highest priorities areas. So we want to make sure we're flexible. We got to make sure we're agile, and that we're constantly addressing and shifting and evolving to be able to do so. The second area I mentioned, sort of I alluded to earlier, our workforce. We have to ensure that our workforce represents the nation we serve, and that we're postured to address the threats of today and also the threats of tomorrow. We've got to be more dynamic. We've got to think about how we evolve, and how we address the sort of changing mission demands, by the way, regardless of where the skill sets come from, whether it be on the civilian side, industry side, military, private sector, industry, academia, across the board. How do we bring all of those, so the right skills to bear against the right challenge? One of the things in that regard that we really have to think about is both sort of our recruiting, development, and retention aspects, and we can talk more if there are questions in that regard and there's interest. But we have some really exciting pilots that we're doing and thinking about doing to ensure that our workforce continues to be sort of the cutting edge sort of advantage that we have. The third area is really about innovation, high risk, high payoff research, game-changing application of technology. We've got to be able to address the mission priorities, both while we ensure sort of our nation's sort of, I call it sort of technical and technological advantage. So we've got to be able to use sort of advanced research and science and technology advances as game changers and differentiators relative to near peer adversaries and other competitors. And I'm really excited about some of the capabilities we have within the Policy and Capability Directorate to be able to do that. And by the way, just a plug in for the Director of S&T, John Beeler I think will join you in a few weeks to share his own Wednesday wisdom. And I'm really excited where John's leading the S&T activities, and I'm really excited to help accelerate and push those so that we can put in place new mechanisms to derive S&T needs and also drive investments to the future. And then the last area is probably no surprise to this audience, is data, sort of the information and data landscape. And really sort of we've talked about moving into the 21st century, we've talked about advancing to the digital age. We're not there. We're not where we need to be relative to, being able to, leverage all data, sort of the abundance of data, technology. We've got to be able to, have all relevant data available to humans and machines whenever, wherever needed to enable sort of best informed information-based decisions. We've got to make sure that we've got the right data to the right people in the right format. We've got to develop solutions that optimize sort of that full range of users. And we've got to build and strengthen partnerships to be able to inform decision making at all level while advancing the mission. So I guess from a priority standpoint, the way I sort of think about it in a sort of a tagline bumper sticker is, if we have the right workforce with the right data and apply the right technology, that's advantage, right? We're able to make smarter, faster decisions and ensure our national security advantage in whatever decision, wherever that decision needs to be made. I know I've sort of gone on, but I think from there you can sort of see the challenges. I mean, in my mind, I think they're pretty clear, right? So innovation. How do we create or reinforce this culture of innovation? And I think that's a challenge and an opportunity, particularly given sort of industry partnerships. I think there are examples where we can learn on the government side, and so we've got to be able to figure out how we do that. How do we solve problems differently? I think many of us are just attuned to sort of, I'm not going to say simplistically, but thinking about solving problems today in the same way we solved them yesterday. And whether it be building a better mousetrap or building a better train or whatever it might be, whatever those adages are. But we've got to think about how we solve problems differently relative to technology, relative to other ways of solving problems, relative to just sort of the changing landscape. I mentioned data. I don't think I need to dwell on that as a challenge. But in order for us to apply technology, in order for our people to inform decisions, we've got to have the right information. And that information is not just a microcosm within the intelligence community. That microcosm is expansive, right? That's across the federal government, our state, local, tribal partners, data, commercial and commercially available data, international partner data, and so on and so on. And so how do we, tag the data, tag the people, right? So how do we both protect the data but also be able to use it? And there are others, right? How do we apply our resources most optimally relative to the range of threats we face? And then how are we agile, right? How do we become more agile, as we confront these challenges to enable us to pivot and build flexibility into our, sort of, we have it. I think we as a nation are inherently flexible and agile. But how do we sort of inculcate that across the full range of sort of what I would call sort of bureaucratic processes?
So you mentioned the workforce as one of the 4 priorities, and Gabrielle Alex at Applied Insights wants to know, how do you see the policies around remote work development expanding for the community, given the extended state of this pandemic? I think this is a very near and dear to the workforce's heart, this issue and opportunity and challenge, really, of flexibility when it comes to the cleared workforce.
Absolutely. Let me first sort of acknowledge that the pandemic has been and continues to be sort of personally and professionally challenging. I can only speak for myself, and it has been challenging for me, whether it be professionally, as I said, in the workplace or at home with my family. And I expect that holds true for everyone online today. It's a great question, and one, if I think about a silver lining of COVID, if there is one, I think it's probably too soon to be able to see that potentially. But I think that it's really challenged this paradigm and this way of thinking that the only way to do work in the intelligence community and in this field is in a classified environment. And I think we've proven that that is not completely the case. Yes, there are aspects of our work that has to be done and continue to have to be done in that environment, but we've actually been able to demonstrate that we can gainfully employ, and not only employ, but apply and make mission progress remotely. And so I think this is really challenging that paradigm. And I know, by the way, that this also holds true for industry partners. And I know, and I've met with many of you, and I know my predecessors have as well, relative to CARES Act and other flexibilities there. So I know that this impacts all of us. But what we've been doing is able to define work that can be done remotely at lower classification levels. And we've been fairly successful, and some agencies have made more strides by virtue of the work that they can do differently and remotely. And some of it is perhaps cultural. And that's an area where we continue to work. We become more creative at adapting and adopting technical solutions to be able to do that. Let's be honest, our unclassified infrastructure is largely email, right? It's not largely built for collaboration. And so that's required a technological shift. But we've been employing flexibilities and attempting to afford those flexibilities while ensuring that we're able to meet the mission. And I'm grateful for, to the administration and to Congress, whether in safety leave or whether it be other areas where we've been able to, sort of create a hybrid, right? So where maybe 10% of someone's work is actually needs to be in a classified environment. And so enabling them to spend 90% of their time in a remote workplace and spend 10% of time in a classified environment. We've made some progress. By the way, some of the things we're thinking about on the workforce side that this is sort of accelerated and caused us to think about in some different ways is from a remote working standpoint is, we talk about recruiting, and largely, the majority of the intelligence community population is largely in the DC area, although, there are certainly pockets, whether it be Mythic or NGA or some of the, Denver, but it's largely fairly limited. One of the things that this has caused us to think about is, should we look at hubs, right? Locations around the country where we can, allow a virtual environment to come in, into a classified environment. But I think we've challenged, demonstrated that the paradigm that we've had, which is, if I don't see you, you're not actually working. We can get beyond it. There are policy aspects of that that we're working through. We're working with the community to capture best practices so we don't lose them. And we ensure that, if, knock on wood, once this is behind us and we get back to normal, that we don't revert back to entirely how we operated before, where it just doesn't make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting. There is that misconception that if people can't see you, you might not be working or working as hard. I would beg to argue that sometimes people who work remotely are even working harder because it's more difficult to step away from their work. So I just wanted to remind folks to keep submitting your questions in the question box. Would encourage you to identify both your name and your organization. So here we have a question from Howard Weitzner at Accenture. Howard is an INSA board member, and he asked about OD&I being a champion for acquisition agility across the IC. What is your vision for improving the speed and effectiveness of acquisition? And I love the fact that Howard used the word speed in the same sentence as acquisition. So thank you, Howard.
Absolutely. Thanks, Howard, as well. And privileged to work with Howard as part of the INSA team on trying to work through this challenge of acquisition agility. So acquisition agility is and continues to be one of the IC initiatives. And it's one area that we believe, and I continue to believe strongly, we need to sort of build in that flexibility. And certainly there are aspects of it that need to be in place for many, many good reasons. But there's some aspects of it that we really need to take a harder look at evolving relative to both the technological landscape, the threats we face, and just how we operate differently. And I think it also reflects the partnership that's continued to evolve with industry. So in that regard, speed is key. I think there are lots of different aspects of acquisition agility or areas where we believe that we can make progress. But I really think that speed is probably where it needs to start. And one of the things that's really interesting in the conversation that we've had around speed in particular is, and perhaps no surprise, although it was a surprise to me, is the key role that communication actually plays. And the role in terms of communication between government and industry, right? And I think it probably comes as no surprise. It's sort of intuitive, but until it's actually hits you squarely in the head as one of the primary factors. And what I mean to say is, if industry has a better understanding of what the government actually needs, beyond what's written in sort of a an RFP or an RFI, and you actually have some level of understanding and you understand the intent, I think then there's a great opportunity to both to understand, and it's a partnership, right? It takes two sides. Sure. And if we're able to sort of have that mutual understanding, I think that we can better avail ourselves of industry's talent and expertise and capabilities to apply against a better understanding of our own challenges. Look, workforce, I mentioned workforce before. but the acquisition workforce continues to be an area of emphasis and focus. And tools, right? I mean, it is, coming into this role, I have been surprised at how manually intensive many of our contracting and acquisition processes are. And so we are doing some really innovative work at working to accelerate, and even things like digital signatures that you would think that we should be able to apply, things like that would really streamline processes. So I look forward to the continued partnership with INSA and other members of the industry team to help inform how we're thinking about advances in the acquisition agility arena.
And our acquisition council is here to work with you on that. I really like the way some of these questions are tying in, and I have to just give a little plug for INSA. We've talked about the workforce, which ties into our Intelligence Champions Council. We've talked about acquisition, which ties into our Acquisition Management Council. And now here's a question from Mary Eddington with KPMG. And she wants to know, are there efforts underway to address the disparate policies for crossing over cleared personnel among intelligence agencies, which ties in really well to our Security Policy Reform Council?
Yes. Oh, sorry, please go ahead, Suzanne.
No, I was thanking Mary for that question, so go ahead.
So there are. We have, again, another one of the IC initiatives is around the right, trusted, agile workforce. And to ensure agility, we have to address the security clearance challenge. And by the way, it's not purely reciprocity. I know the question was worded as reciprocity relative to within the IC agencies. There are larger sort of peel back the onion in terms of the aperture of security clearance and some of the challenges in that regard. And we are working with our partners in the National Counterintelligence and Security Center to look at where we can evolve our policies to allow us to more rapidly do this. I will say, more recently, I have some examples where we've actually been able to do that at the ODNI and be able to accelerate that timeline beyond what I thought was possible. And so I will say that there are some examples that I'm aware of is where we are able to do that more rapidly, but I fully recognize that it's not consistent across the board, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. And just as a side note, we're also working, and I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about sort of public-private talent exchange legislation which we received, which is movement between industry and government. And I think that that's an area where we have to think through as well, and work on how do we expedite that process too.
Fair points. So Dave Fisher with Astroscale in Denver, Colorado, where we'll be having an event in September 2021, God willing, asks, can you speak to the ODNI's role in space oversight and how you view congestion and overcrowding in LEO? So
let me talk about space in general, and then I can sort of talk about how we're viewing space. Again, commercial space is making incredible advances, and there are many capabilities that on the government side we're looking at in terms of what the relationship is and how do we apply NSPD 27 and how do we apply guidance relative to leveraging commercial capabilities where possible. So I'm really excited about the possibility. I'm really excited about the innovation that's taking place. I'm really excited about sort of as we move from what I would say traditional pixels to analytic services and how we fuse information and apply algorithms. It's really exciting. So I'll just say that I'm a big fan of what's going on in the commercial space arena. I am also very well aware that what was once the purview of a few sort of state actors is now the purview of many, and it's not just U.S. commercial industry, it's a global industry. And yes, congestion, will certainly and continues to be a challenge. I think that you can sort of see the charts where it's exponential increase. We're not there yet, but it is absolutely something that we have to manage. And certainly with all of that, it presents both, again, as sort of a challenge and an opportunity. As with Space Force establishment and DoD as sort of a warfighting and using it and applying it sort of as a warfighting domain, as we look at sort of how capabilities are being used, there's a lot to work through, and there's a lot to work through, particularly as we sort of make a shift to great power competition much more directly as a national security imperative. That may not be a terribly gratifying answer, But that's how I'm thinking about it.
Well, you're telling it like you see it, so we appreciate your candidness. So Tony Frazier with Maxar says, Dustin, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Can you share any updates on how ODNI is collaborating with the DoD on AI ML innovation initiatives? Specifically, it would be really great to hear how the Augmenting Intelligence with Machines initiative is aligning with the JAIC.
Thanks, Tony. Absolutely. The partnership with DoD is absolutely critical around AI. And a lot of what we're looking at, I will say, both within the intelligence community and with DoD, is speed and sense making. And we both have that as a challenge. And although I would argue on the DoD side that those timelines are often shorter. So that partnership is strong. I think part of it's been also figuring out what DoD's requirements are in that arena and what the IC needs and where we can apply AI ML. I am glad that we have a new AI ML lead, an AIM champion at the ODNI, who's joined us, and so he's putting his fingerprints on this, and really looking at where we can not only partner with the Department of Defense, but also how do we drive AI ML in terms of, we've talked a lot about scalability, enterprise scale, but also where can we apply AI ML most effectively, I would say in niche arenas as well. We're also looking at areas where, how do we apply AI ML in other areas beyond I would say the mission space, which I know the JAIC is largely looking at, but where can we apply it in the areas of counterintelligence or human resources or logistics or acquisition or some other IC missions where we have data and we can leverage AI ML technologies to better inform decisions. The other thing that we are working as it relates to the broader Department of Defense is partnering with the Undersecretary of Defense for R&E and really looking at how do we look at the broader research and the broader investments that the department is making, and where can we partner more effectively to both maybe advance or inform or apply IC resources along with DoD resources, or whether there are areas where we should be working more collaboratively. So I'd say there's progress been made, and I look forward to continuing to further that partnership. There's a new head of the JAIC, General Groen, and there's a new head of AI ML on the ODNI team, and so I look forward to seeing what they can do to the partnership to further strengthen it and further deliver advantage in that space.
Shameless plug, it's just too easy. We are hosting him for a leadership luncheon in December. So I'm glad you brought that up. We're looking forward to hearing from him. So I'm totally shifting gears here. We had a little time to talk in the green room as well as during our dry run, but it's an unusual time for all of us personally, quite unprecedented. A few silver linings here and there if we're really desperate to find them. But what are you doing for entertainment? Podcast or binge watching? Any good books you're reading that you can share with our close to 500 virtual registrants?
Absolutely. I will admit that I'm probably not getting as much time to myself as I might like with the kids in hybrid school and virtual school and back and forth. And my wife working remotely from home, and me going to the office and trying to make it all work. And so, but that said, yeah. So I decided in the midst of the pandemic actually to dust off a book that's been on my shelf for a while that I just hadn't gotten around to reading, which is a biography of Johann Sebastian Bach, of all things, called "Music in the Castle of Heaven." And the reason that I decided to pick that one up is I studied music and performed when I was younger and in college, and so I've always been fascinated with it. But the really interesting thing is that I find Bach's music to be it has a great structure, and it's just incredibly profound in my view, and I do enjoy it. And so I just wanted to learn more about him and his own challenges, and that he was able to work through those and create some pretty amazing music. I think is an inspiration to me as I try to live every day and to make our nation more secure and to do what I need to do at home, to seeing how he made sense of his reality and created some incredible music that's still with us today. I will say that on the podcast side, unfortunately not so much, and on the TV side, as I was telling Suzanne earlier, Yeah, my wife has been watching a bunch of shows that many of you are also watching, I'm sure, and I've fallen asleep in probably every single one, and so I've actually stopped trying. I now, instead of falling asleep on the couch, just go up to bed earlier and read a little bit or get some work done, and then I'll fall asleep. And then the last thing I'll say is, with a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, we're sort of in the cartoons, and then there's Marvel, and then, you know, I must admit, you know, a little bit of video games thrown into the mix with them, which is a little good family competition.
Good. Well, we all need that balance. So just to repeat, the book is Music in the Castle of Heaven. If anyone wants to check it out, feel free to do so. We've got Harvey Arlington of Guidehouse, and he asks, for future requirements, how much is determined by what customers are asking / dictating versus what the IC is uncovering and seeing?
So the requirements area is one that we are absolutely evolving, and I am really pleased with some of the progress we've made in there, whether it be enterprise capabilities documents, which, by the way, focus on mission need, not solutions. And so I think that that's one area where we've advanced. We've also begun increasingly to apply more rigor to analysis of alternatives, so that we really have the breadth of understanding of how we could potentially solve this problem, which gets at what I mentioned earlier in terms of ensuring that we're not solving problems in the same way we've always have been. And we've also been very mindful of our requirements documents not being prescriptive and prescribing a solution, and really leveraging sort of what I would call sort of that phase A work to refine. We're not perfect. There are certainly some areas where there's a solution that's being called for, and that's our challenge, is to work with our user community to, I would say, build in some additional levels of trust, particularly as we introduce sort of AI/ML, or we introduce other ways of operating, or we do things differently. Because, and by the way, as it should be, right? We have no-fail missions, and members of our national security apparatus who depend on what we do every single day, and we want to ensure that they can continue to count on what we do every single day if we do it differently. And so it's part of it is that communication. I think the other side of this also is understanding the ways we can solve these problems, and that's where the industry partnership comes into play, right? Is really about understanding if there are other ways that we can solve these problems, that we can apply technology, that we can do things differently, and with some level of confidence in that's going to be either able to be delivered today or when we need it in the future. I think that will help give additional levels of confidence. And I think the last thing I'll say in that regard is we're also shifting. We have a sort of, I'm going to call it a one-size-fits-all acquisition process that was largely developed in a hardware-intensive, building a satellite age. And as we look at software, as we look at how quickly you can recode something to make dramatic evolution and huge leaps forward in terms of what you're able to do. And you look at technology and applying technology in that regard, we haven't kept pace, and that's an area where we are accelerating, and in partnership with the Department of Defense, really thinking about and looking at applying and employing additional flexibilities and refining our models so that we can have additional flexibilities, appropriate flexibilities, but again, ensuring appropriate oversight. But we can reflect the fact that when you're building, again, a satellite, that's different from if you're building an algorithm, and right. We've got to reflect that difference.
So the next question is from Joe Valencia with Ball Aerospace. I also wanted to mention before I get on to his question, we have about 10 minutes left. I've yet to get a question from a student. I almost always get a couple questions from students. So if any undergrad, grad, high school, elementary, whatever level of student you are, please send in your questions. So Joe wants to know, what are your priorities for policy and capabilities this next year, and what constitutes a successful 2021?
Thanks, Joe. Where to begin? Right, so in each of the areas that I mentioned in terms of priorities, I mean, I can really quickly sort of go through, not to rehash what I mentioned before, but really talk about what I think of success. But I think very fundamentally, what I want to see is that we are on the path to making better informed decisions, right? That we have a better understanding of where we are, the decisions we've made, and what our posture is, and then we have some semblance of understanding of how we need to be better postured for the future. If we can do that, I would be thrilled. I think within that, I'm excited what we're doing in sort of the assessment arena. We've established, and it wasn't me, it predates me, an intelligence net assessment capability. I'm really excited about what they're doing, what they can bring about, how do we think about that 10, 20, 30 plus year landscape, which is what we've got to be thinking about in the context of near-term decisions. I'm really excited. I want to see some of the pilots we're talking about in the human capital arena become realized. I mentioned the public-private talent exchange between industry and the IC. We've got to make some progress there. We're focusing on a handful of skills, whether it be AI, ML, cloud services. Welcome any ideas in terms of where that talent exchange would make sense. We're also looking at how do we, as I said, recruit, retain, and develop a little bit differently, right? So how do we recruit earlier? How do we develop the skills and bring on people who have an aptitude and the ability to do this work, whether or not they've demonstrated it, whether experientially or have an advanced degree in the field? But let's bring them on. Let's expose them to the IC mission. Let's provide that education and let's develop and grow that talent. It's the same thing with our existing workforce, right? So we're talking about a number of pilots where we're actually looking at those individuals within our workforce, existing workforce, that want to raise their hand and are interested in learning something new, growing into a different area. So let's give them the opportunity to, instead of sort of bringing in people from without, let's focus on our talent within, and so give them the opportunities to grow, develop, gaining different experiences, new experiences, gain educational opportunities, and have those abilities so that we can, continue to apply their talent, expertise, and leverage the experience that they already bring. S&T, IARPA, there's great stuff there. There's great stuff in S&T. We mentioned policy, right? Evolving our policy. We talked about acquisition agility. So there's a lot.
There is. So you were talking about education for the workforce, and this is a passion of mine, but a question from Michael Smeda. He wants to thank you for the discussion, but he wants to know, what programs do you have in place to support industry personnel to do fellowships and then return to their companies? We have a fellowship program at INSA where folks from government can come, stay a year to 2 years. And although it's not quite private sector, they get a completely different perspective working with our private sector members. So what are your thoughts on programs like that within the government going to industry?
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael, for the question. So there, I mentioned the public-private talent exchange. That's the primary IC mechanism today, and we just received legislation that enables us to have that program. So it's very much in its nascent stages. We're working to establish the framework. So stand by, and that's an IC-wide program. I know that some agencies have had episodic programs, that are sort of agency specific, and I'd say that those continue to exist. But really, the one that I am most, again, the reason that we sought the legislation was because we didn't believe that we had the authorities and the ability to do this IC-wide, and so this program is unfortunately or fortunately that program, and so we're making progress, and we look forward to communicating more on that, and also to partnering to make sure that it's beneficial to both, again, the government and also industry.
I think it's crucial. So I have a student question. Connor Clark says, a lot of us as students have language skills. Good for you, Connor. Big fan of language skills. But our early careers will be in policy, capabilities, administration, strategy, etc. What do you recommend to keep up these skills on the job? Are digital advances in translation software likely to make these skills increasingly obsolete? I know my first response would be travel. Go immerse yourself in a culture where they speak these languages, right? But a little bit challenging during a pandemic. So what's your response, Dustin?
No, thanks, Connor. I appreciate the question. So a few thoughts. One is language skills continue to be sought by the intelligence community. We continue to, employ members of our team and seek prospective members that have language skills. I think it's not just language, it's in and of itself, right? It's sort of that broader cultural expertise and cultural awareness coupled with the language skills that really is sort of that mix. It also depends on the language. Within my organization, within our IC Human Capital organization, we have the Foreign Language Program Office that really looks at understanding what the IC needs and how do we both recruit as a team and apply and employ talent, our talent against it. We're also, to the question, Also looking at, at automated ways, at a sort of a computer-based, language translation software and capabilities. And that is absolutely being employed and continues to be employed. And maybe one day it'll be good enough, but it's not sufficiently good enough for us not to seek and retain members of our team with those languages. The other piece of it is that there are also members of our team that have language skills, but they don't apply, that they do not use them every day. So I think that gets to your point, right? And so depending on the agency, there are incentives, right? And there's language pay, again, depending on the language. And there's also encouragement to maintain those skills. And so, that gets at whether it be reading, whether it be podcasts increasingly and other ways to try to maintain your skills. I do know that there are also groups within the IC of people who speak languages that actually get together and do that as well. And so there are some sort of networking opportunities in that regard. But those needs depend on agency, vary by agency, but we still value them.
So no, I think those are great responses given the world we're living in now, particularly with the groups that gather, and I know they're doing it virtually right now. So I have 2 more questions and I have 4 minutes. So Marcel Letcher with Lockheed Martin asks, what are the 3 biggest innovation needs that IC must solve in the next few years?
I think a few. One is, what are ways to apply technology differently than we're applying it today? I know that's a big issue, but one area is data, around data, both access to data, protecting data. I mean, data access is really important. I think there's also data integrity, right? As we look at unclassified secrets, top secret, I mean, that full range of data and sort of how we use all of it, I think is one. Another area around innovation, I hate to say it, is cultural. What are some ways that we can really foster and create and encourage and reinforce a culture of innovation where we're willing to try things, take risks, knowing that some aren't going to work, and we're okay with that. We've done it with our eyes wide open. We're gonna, as one of my former bosses, told me when I stepped into a big job, we're gonna celebrate success together, and we're gonna work together to address, what didn't go well. But that shouldn't stop us, right, from making decisions and taking risk. And that's what we've got to figure out how we inculcate that, not just, and that's just across the board.
Agreed. So last question, Alex Thompson, Carleton University student in Public Affairs and Policy Management, wants to know, would you recommend future generations of policy students to learn basic coding? With this to establish strong connections between the policy and cyber intelligence field. I'm completely unqualified to answer this question, but I know exactly what I would say. I want to see what you have to say, Dustin.
I'll say yes.
Okay.
So I'll give you my background. International relations. I have an MBA. And I was sort of on a medical pre-med track, so I was immersed in math and science and the range. And I've continued to try to update my own skills in sort of this data-rich, data savviness. It's not a trite term. I think we absolutely need members of our team who have, I would say, sort of a traditional liberal arts background, but they need to have, I think, to be most competitive and to be able to work in this environment, they need to have an appreciation for data. They've got to have an appreciation for coding. They have to have an appreciation of what machines can do and how to bring data together to inform a decision. And you've got to have that appreciation, so you not only know how to do it, but you also know what questions to ask, and you know what to ask of the data, and those people who might be, right, the data scientist sitting next to you who is trying to enable you, right, to do whatever it is that you're doing. If you can have some understanding and appreciation, that's what it's going to take. And that's increasingly what we're looking for. I think we're not, I hope, and as long as I'm in the seat, we're not going to pivot the entire way of saying, nope, you have to, if you do not have, a degree in a cyber field or a data field, then you're not going to be competitive for IC employment. That is not at all my message, and nor is it the message of our team. We really require all of those skills and the diversity of skills and the diversity of background and the diversity of experiences. That's what makes our country great, and that's what makes the IC great and gives us an advantage. And so it's so yes, I will just say absolutely don't need to be an expert necessarily, depending on what you're what position you're seeking, but absolutely a critical skill.
Well, and I really like the way you framed it as an appreciation. You don't have to be a coder, but to understand the basics I think it's like that with any, language. You might not be fluent, but to have learned bits and pieces of a foreign language, I think are important. I think the same can go with coding. So it's the end of our conversation this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Any Wednesday wisdom, words of wisdom that you want to share in parting with our virtual attendees?
I think, thanks, Suzanne. Hopefully I've been somewhat wise, but no, in all seriousness, I'll just leave you with two thoughts. One is we can't go it alone. It's about partnerships in every sense of the word, and I fully believe that and try to live that belief that it's the partnerships that make us strong, and no one of us is smarter than all of us. And so to confront the challenges we're facing, we need all of us, and we need all of us even sometimes when we're maybe not entirely receptive. And so we've got to be able to partner in ways that we can't even think of today in order to advance and ensure advantage in the future. And then the other thing I'll just leave you with is sort of, again, my sort of tagline, which is, I really believe where my focus is, if we have the right workforce with the right data and the right technology, that we can make better, smarter, faster decisions, and we can ensure our advantage. And so within each one of those, that partnership applies in order for us to be able to do just that and keep our nation safe and secure.
That's terrific, Dustin, and they were words of wisdom. So thank you so much. I also want to thank all of those who tuned in this afternoon for watching online. Once again, I want to thank our sponsor, Northrop Grumman, for their critical support of this program. Also, I wanted to point out next month, our cyber and technology priorities will take center stage here at INSA. On Tuesday, December 1st, we will examine the future of the national security cyber workforce. Chris Inglis will provide the opening keynote, followed by a panel discussion with senior leaders. More details will be coming soon on that event. And then on December 2nd, John Beeler, Director of Science and Technology there at ODNI, will join us for the next installment of Wednesday Wisdom. And then on December 9th, we will hold a leadership luncheon with the new JAIC Director, Lieutenant General Michael Groen. As always, you can check out these events at www.insaonline.org. And when the webinar ends, we would be very grateful if you would just take a moment and complete our survey. We really do examine these results and try to make our future programming reflective of your feedback. So this concludes today's program. Stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful evening. And thanks again, Dustin. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks. Just echo, stay safe, be well.